You're being played right now, and you don't even know it. But in the next 30 minutes, that changes forever. Every conversation you have, every interaction, every smile someone gives you, it's all a game. And Machiavelli figured this out 500 years ago. He saw what no one wanted to admit, that humans don't show you who they are. They show you what works. Most people think Machiavelli was just some ruthless political advisor. But here's what they miss. Machiavelli wasn't teaching cruelty. He was teaching sight. The ability to see past the performance and understand what people actually want, what they fear, and what they'll do when everything's on the line. This video is divided into 3 parts, and each part builds on the last. If you jump ahead, you'll miss the framework that makes this actually work. Stay with me through all 3 parts, because by the end, you won't just read people better. You'll understand human nature at a level most people never reach. From the time you're a child, you're taught to trust what people say. But Machiavelli knew better. He spent years watching princes lie, allies betray, and good men get destroyed by people they trusted. People don't communicate to tell the truth. They communicate to get what they want. Every human being walks around with 2 versions of themselves. There's the person they actually are, full of fear and pain. And then there's the person they need you to see. The polished version, the acceptable version. Machiavelli called this the necessity of appearance. And nothing's changed. Your coworker who acts confident might be drowning in imposter syndrome. Your friend who's always positive might be falling apart inside. Everyone is performing. And Machiavelli's 17 truths will teach you how to see through the performance. Truth 1. People reveal themselves through what they protect, not what they share. Machiavelli understood that a ruler's true priorities weren't found in public speeches. They were found in what they guarded most carefully. People will tell you all kinds of things about themselves. Their dreams, their values, their beliefs. But most of that is branding. If you want to know who someone really is, watch what they protect. The person who talks about honesty but guards their phone like a state secret? That's a tell. The person who preaches independence but panics when you don't text back? That's a tell. What someone protects reveals what they fear losing. And what they fear losing reveals what they actually value. Your partner says they trust you completely, but the moment you mention an ex, their entire energy shifts. That's protection mode, telling you something their words won't. Stop listening to what people say about themselves. Start watching what makes them defensive. That's where the truth lives. Truth 2. Generosity without strategy is just people-pleasing in disguise. Machiavelli warned rulers not to be too generous. Not because kindness is bad, but because constant, indiscriminate generosity makes you weak and resented. If you give to everyone all the time, your generosity loses meaning. It becomes expected. And people start seeing you as someone they can use. You know that person who's always helping everyone? Always available, always saying yes, always putting themselves last? Real generosity comes from choice, but people-pleasing comes from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear that if you stop being useful, people will stop wanting you around. Watch how someone reacts when their generosity isn't appreciated. Do they let it go? Or do they get bitter? If someone's kindness comes with invisible strings attached, it was never kindness. It was a transaction. Real strength is selective generosity, knowing when to give and when to withhold. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. Truth 3. How someone treats their enemies reveals more than how they treat their friends. Anyone can be kind to people who benefit them. That's easy. But how does someone act when they have nothing to gain? When someone has wronged them? When they have the power to punish? That's when you see who they really are. Someone gets promoted over your coworker. Your coworker smiles, says congratulations, and then for 6 months, subtly undermines that person. That's not competition. That's cruelty disguised as professionalism. Machiavelli would say a person who cannot handle losing with grace will never handle winning with fairness. When you meet someone new, watch how they talk about people who aren't there. How do they describe their ex? Their old boss? That friend they fell out with?
If every story ends with them as the victim and someone else as the monster, you're not hearing the truth, you're hearing a pattern, and eventually, you'll become the monster in someone else's story too. Truth 4. Flattery always has a motive. Machiavelli warned princes constantly about flatterers. He knew that people who praised you most were often positioning themselves for gain.
The problem with flattery is that it works. It feels good, it bypasses logic, and goes straight to the ego. Someone you barely know starts complimenting you constantly, and it feels amazing. But then, a few weeks later, they need something, a favor, an introduction. And suddenly, you realize the compliments weren't random. They were set up. If someone praises you before they know you, they're not seeing you. They're seeing what they want from you. Real respect is earned slowly. It's specific. But flattery is fast, vague, and excessive. Machiavelli's advice: surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because flatterers will keep you blind, comfortable, and weak. Truth 5. People don't fear strong leaders. They fear unpredictable ones. Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than loved if you can't be both. But most people misunderstand what he meant. He wasn't talking about terror. He was talking about respect born from consistency and consequence. People don't fear strength. They adapt to it. What they fear is unpredictability, not knowing which version of you they're going to get today. A boss who's tough but fair gets respect. But a boss who's nice one day and explosive the next, everyone's terrified. The same applies to relationships. A partner who's inconsistent, who's warm one moment and cold the next, who punishes you for things they ignored yesterday, they don't create love. They create anxiety. When people know what you stand for, when they know how you'll react, they trust you, even if they don't always like you. But the moment you become erratic, you lose that trust. And fear-based relationships always collapse eventually. If someone is inconsistent in how they treat you, if their mood determines your value, you're not in a relationship. You're in a hostage situation. Truth 6. Loyalty is negotiated, not given. Here's a hard truth. Loyalty isn't earned through kindness or history. Loyalty is maintained through ongoing value. Machiavelli saw this clearly. A prince who stopped being useful to his allies was abandoned immediately. People stay loyal as long as the relationship serves them. Maybe you make them feel understood. Maybe you provide stability. But the moment that dynamic shifts, loyalty fades. Not because people are evil, because people are human. When someone talks about loyalty constantly, when they make a big show of how ride or die they are, that's usually overcompensation. Because people who are genuinely loyal don't announce it. They just show up. Machiavelli wasn't cynical. He was realistic. Stop expecting unconditional loyalty and start building relationships based on mutual value. You'll never be blindsided again. So far, we've covered the surface, the masks people wear, the games they play. But now we're going deeper. Because Machiavelli didn't just study behavior, he studied motive. He asked why people do what they do. And what he found was that underneath every action is a calculation. In this second part, we're exploring the cracks in the armor. The moments where the strategy fails and the real person shows up. Because no one can maintain the performance forever. Truth 7. Ambition reveals itself through impatience. Machiavelli understood that ambitious people can't hide for long. Because ambition creates urgency. And urgency creates mistakes. The person who wants power will rush. They'll overreach. They'll make moves before they're ready, because waiting feels like losing. Someone new joins the company. And within weeks, they're already positioning themselves, volunteering for high-visibility projects, making sure leadership notices them. People who are secure in their competence don't need to announce it. They let the work speak. The same happens in relationships. Someone meets you and immediately starts talking about the future, and it feels intense, romantic. But Machiavelli would ask, what are they rushing toward, and what are they running from? When someone is impatient, they're revealing something. Either they don't believe they deserve it and need to grab it before it's taken away, Or they're not interested in the thing itself. They're interested in what it represents. Truth 8. People who need to be right are covering a deeper wound. Machiavelli dealt with advisors constantly, and he noticed the ones who always needed to be right were the ones who couldn't handle being wrong. When someone argues every point, when they can't let a conversation end without having the last word, when they correct small details that don't even matter, they're not defending truth. They're defending ego. For them, being wrong isn't just an error. It's a threat. You mention something, and immediately they jump in. Actually, that's not quite right. That's not about accuracy. That's about dominance. Contrast that with someone who's secure. They can hear a different perspective without feeling attacked. They can say, "I didn't know that," without shame. They can even be wrong publicly and not crumble. Why? Because their self-worth isn't tied to being right. When someone constantly needs to correct you, they're telling you something. They were probably punished for being wrong growing up. Or their intelligence is the only thing they feel confident about. Machiavelli would say a leader who cannot admit error cannot learn, and a person who cannot be wrong cannot grow. Truth 9. Silence in the face of injustice is a choice, not neutrality. Machiavelli saw this constantly in politics. When someone powerful did something wrong, the people around them stayed silent. Not because they agreed, but because speaking up was dangerous. And he understood silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. And that choice reveals exactly where someone's loyalties lie. You're in a group. Someone says something cruel, something that crosses a line, and everyone else just laughs nervously, changes the subject. Why? Because speaking up would be uncomfortable. It would create conflict. So they stay quiet. And in doing so, they choose the comfort of the aggressor over the dignity of the victim. You learn who someone is not by what they do when it's easy, but by what they do when it costs them something. When something wrong happens in front of someone, watch their reaction. Do they speak up? Do they check in privately later? Or do they pretend it never happened? The person who stays silent when it matters will never be there when you need them. Truth 10. People punish others for the freedom they deny themselves. Machiavelli watched people in power punish behaviors in others that they secretly envied. A ruler who denied themselves pleasure would become obsessed with controlling others' indulgences. Someone works 80 hours a week, never takes vacations. And the moment someone else sets boundaries, leaves work on time, takes a mental health day, they're furious. That's lazy. That's entitled. But here's what's really happening. They're not angry at the other person. They're angry at themselves, because deep down, they wish they could do the same. But they've built their entire identity around suffering. And watching someone choose differently feels like an attack on everything they've sacrificed. When someone judges you harshly for a choice that doesn't harm them, they're not judging you. They're negotiating with themselves. Ask, what freedom am I representing that they've denied themselves? Once you see it, the criticism loses its power. Truth 11. The person who brags about their integrity usually has the least. Machiavelli was surrounded by people who performed morality. Leaders who gave grand speeches about honor and justice, then betrayed allies the moment it benefited them. And he noticed the louder someone proclaimed their virtue, the less virtuous they actually were. People with real integrity don't announce it. It's just how they move through the world. But people performing integrity need you to see it. Someone posts constantly about being a good person. I always help others. I stand for justice. But if you look closer, their actions don't match. They're terrible to service workers. They gossip viciously. The performance is loud because the reality is empty. If someone needs to tell you they're honest, they're probably not. If someone needs to tell you they're loyal, they're probably not. Watch actions. Ignore words. That's how you find real integrity. Truth 12. How someone handles your success reveals their character. Machiavelli knew that envy was one of the most destructive forces in human relationships. People will celebrate you until you surpass them. Then everything changes. You get a promotion. You hit a milestone. Some people will genuinely celebrate you. Their happiness for you will feel clean, uncomplicated, real. But others? They'll smile, but it won't reach their eyes, or they'll immediately pivot to themselves. Yeah, I'm working on something big too. That's not support. That's competition. A person who cannot celebrate your success without comparing it to their own is not your friend. They're your rival. Share good news with someone and watch their face before they control their reaction. That split second will tell you everything. Real friends feel your wins like their own. Envious people feel your wins like a loss. We're almost there. If you've made it this far, you're not just learning to read people. You're learning to see systems, patterns. But this final part is different. Because now we're going to talk about the deepest layer, the wounds, the unhealed parts of people that drive everything. Machiavelli understood that every adult is just a child who survived. And if you can see what that child needed and didn't get, you can understand the adult completely. Truth 13. People don't argue from logic. They argue from unhealed wounds. Machiavelli watched political debates his entire life, and he realized people don't form beliefs and then defend them. They experience pain and then build beliefs to make sense of that pain. Someone says, "You can't trust anyone. Everyone's out for themselves." That sounds like a worldview. But Machiavelli would ask, who betrayed them? When did they learn that trust was dangerous? Someone argues that marriage is a trap. Dig deeper, and you'll find their parents had a terrible marriage. Someone insists that ambition is everything and emotions are weakness. Dig deeper, and you'll find they were taught early that love was conditional on achievement. The argument isn't about the belief. It's about protecting themselves from feeling that pain again. Once you understand this, debates become completely different. You stop trying to win with facts, because facts don't touch wounds. Listen to someone's strongest opinions, the ones they defend most aggressively, because those aren't opinions. Those are scars. Truth 14. People treat you how they were treated until they heal. Machiavelli watched patterns repeat across generations. Cruel rulers had been abused by their predecessors. Paranoid leaders had been betrayed early. The wound becomes the weapon. Someone criticizes you constantly. Nothing is ever good enough. Your first instinct might be to think they hate you, but someone treated them this way, and they never healed from it. So now they repeat it. Or someone who's emotionally distant, never opens up, never shares how they feel. Maybe they grew up in a house where feelings were punished, where crying meant weakness, so they learned to shut down. And now, even when they're with someone safe, the walls stay up. People will repeat their trauma until they acknowledge it. The person who was abandoned will abandon others first. The person who was controlled will become controlling. It's not evil. It's unprocessed pain. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you tolerate it. It just means you stop internalizing it. Their wound is not your responsibility to heal. Truth 15. The need to be needed is fear of being unwanted. Machiavelli watched advisors who made themselves indispensable. At first glance, it looked like strategy, but it was terror. Terror that if they weren't needed, they'd be discarded. You know that person who always has to fix everything? Who can't let you struggle? Can't let you handle your own problems? It looks like care, but often it's control disguised as help. Deep down, they believe their value is conditional. They believe that if they're not useful, they're not worth keeping around. Watch what happens when you don't need them, when you solve your own problem. Do they celebrate your independence, or do they feel threatened? Real love celebrates your growth. It wants you to become more capable, more independent. But people operating from this wound can't do that. Your independence feels like abandonment. If someone always has to be the hero, the savior, the fixer, ask yourself, what are they afraid will happen if I don't need them? Truth 16. Cruelty is just pain with nowhere else to go. Machiavelli is often misquoted as endorsing cruelty, but if you read him carefully, he's explaining it. He observed that the cruelest leaders were often the most wounded. Their brutality wasn't strength. It was a defense mechanism that had calcified into identity. When someone is cruel, they're not operating from power. They're operating from unresolved pain. Pain they never processed. Pain they've carried so long it's turned into rage, and that rage has to go somewhere. Think about the bully. That bully was probably bullied. That cruel person was probably subjected to cruelty. And instead of healing from it, they became it. Because it felt better to inflict pain than to keep absorbing it. Understanding this doesn't mean you tolerate cruelty. It doesn't mean you excuse it. But it does mean you stop taking it personally. When someone is cruel to you, it's not about you. It's about the pain they're carrying. Set boundaries. Remove yourself. But don't carry their wound as if it's yours. Truth 17. How someone talks about their past tells you their future. This is Machiavelli's final and most powerful truth. Machiavelli believed that patterns persist, that the way someone handled power before predicts how they'll handle it again, that history doesn't just repeat, it echoes. How someone talks about their past, their old relationships, their former friends. That's not just storytelling. It's a preview. You meet someone new. They tell you about their ex. Listen carefully to how they tell that story. Do they take any accountability? Do they acknowledge their part in what went wrong? Or is the ex a complete villain and they're a complete victim? If every ex is crazy, if every former friend betrayed them, if every old boss had it out for them, you're not hearing bad luck. You're hearing a pattern. A person who cannot reflect on their past with nuance cannot grow, and a person who cannot grow will repeat the same dynamics forever. When someone talks about their history, listen for three things. Do they take accountability? Or is it always someone else's fault? Do they recognize patterns? Or is every situation isolated? Have they learned anything? Or are they just repeating the same story with different characters? If they can't see their patterns, they will repeat them with you. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior that hasn't been examined, understood, or changed. So here we are. 17 truths. 3 parts. And if you've stayed with me this entire time, you're different now. You don't see people the same way. You see the mask. You see the cracks. You see the wound. And that's power. Not the power to manipulate. The power to protect yourself. The power to choose wisely. The power to stop being blindsided by people who are just repeating their unhealed patterns. But here's what Machiavelli would want you to remember. These truths aren't just about reading other people. They're about reading yourself. Because every truth we've covered applies to you too. You wear masks. Your persona cracks. You have wounds that drive your behavior. And the more clearly you see others, the more clearly you're forced to see yourself. That's the real gift. Not just awareness of others, but self-awareness. The ability to recognize your patterns, trace them back to their source, and choose differently. Machiavelli wasn't trying to create manipulators. He was trying to create people who couldn't be manipulated. People who understood human nature so deeply that they were immune to games, immune to performance, immune to lies. And now you're one of those people. So what do you do with this? First, you practice. You watch. You listen. You test these truths in real life and see how accurate they are. Second, you extend compassion. Because when you understand that everyone is just a wounded child in an adult body, trying to survive with the tools they were given, it's harder to hate them. It's easier to set boundaries without anger. And third, you apply these truths to yourself. You ask the hard questions. Where am I wearing a mask? Where is my persona cracking? What wounds am I carrying that I haven't healed? Because the goal isn't just to read everyone else. It's to become someone who can't be read because you've done the work. That's what Machiavelli would respect. Not someone who uses these truths to control others, but someone who uses them to free themselves. If this video changed how you see people, if it gave you language for things you've always sensed but couldn't name, leave a comment below. Tell me which truth hit you hardest. Tell me about a moment when you saw someone's mask crack and suddenly everything made sense. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore. More philosophers, more psychological truths, more tools to help you navigate this world without losing yourself in the process. Machiavelli wrote 500 years ago, but human nature hasn't changed. The games are the same, the wounds are the same, the patterns are the same. The only difference is now you know how to see them, and that changes everything.